It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story.
Does anyone ever say, you know what, you've done a good job because everyone else has sat on their and done nothing? No signs of that, no?
The cracks in government over the concrete crisis, with the Education Secretary marked down over a 4-letter rant.
Do you think you're doing an effing good job?
I wasn't talking about me, actually. I was talking about the department.
Her comments, though, go down badly in the classroom as we speak to already overstretched head teachers.
Oh, my goodness. And that's our Education Secretary using that language.
Also tonight, after what he called very difficult days, Northern Ireland's top police officer resigns. Bringing in new blood, Sir Keir Starmer shuffles his pack as he tries to get the opposition election ready. We see China's roads to nowhere as the economy wobbles, laden with a mountain of debt. The potentially deadly pests which could be taking wing in Britain's warmer climate. And stretching summer into September as UK temperatures approach the hottest of the year. Plus, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's coming up in our press preview from 10:30. Hello there, good evening. Thousands of children are beginning the school year in temporary classrooms, and many heads are scrambling to sort building works. But the Education Secretary's response to the concrete crisis today was to complain in crude language over not being thanked. She later told Sky's Politics Hub that she was talking about her department and didn't expect anyone to feel sorry for her. Her outburst came after the Prime Minister had angrily denied that he was to blame for underfunding a school building programme. We'll see the impact of the disruption in one school in a moment, but first our political correspondent Rob Powell reports.
The Education Secretary Gillian Keegan on the airwaves this morning, very much on message.
So the first thing is to get the schools open, minimise the disruption to education.
But then, at the end of another interview...
Does anyone ever say, you know what, you've done a good job because everyone else has sat on their and done nothing? No signs of that, no?
On the Sky News Politics Hub, the Education Secretary confronted with the offending clip.
Does anyone ever say, you know what, you've done a good job because everyone else has sat on their and done nothing? No signs of that, no?
Before offering this explanation.
So do you think you're doing an effing good job?
I wasn't talking about me, actually. I was talking about the department. The job that I was talking about started in March 2022, so way before I was in. That was an off-the-cuff comment, by the way, as well, which was, as you realised, I thought the interview was over. So I apologise for my choice language.
It comes as some blame for school closures starts to be directed towards the Prime Minister, with one former senior civil servant saying as Chancellor, Rishi Sunak cut school repair budgets.
Are you to blame for what's happening now? And do you want to apologise to parents and pupils?
I think that is completely and utterly wrong. Actually, one of the first things I did as Chancellor in my first spending review in 2020 was to announce a new 10-year school rebuilding programme for 500 schools. Now, that equates to about 50 schools a year that will be refurbished or rebuilt. And if you look at what we've been doing over the previous decade, that's completely in line with what we've always done.
As MPs return to Westminster after summer, this heated row is the last thing the Prime Minister needs.
The Education Secretary's unplanned intervention is definitely embarrassing, but the bigger political risk for the government is still that broader image of concrete potentially crumbling in schools and other public buildings. It's already being seized on by Labour as evidence as they see it of the result of 13 years of Tory rule.
And looking at the figures for recent years, in 2020, the Department for Education said £5.3 billion a year was needed to maintain schools and mitigate safety risks. The department requested an average of £4 billion a year from the Treasury, but they were only allocated £3.1 billion a year, 40% less than the recommended figure.
I think we will look back in shame.
Teaching unions angry more progress hasn't been made.
We've got 22,000 schools in this country. When exactly, which century are we expecting to have the school estate fit for purpose for young people? I think lots of parents will listen to that, listen to the boastfulness of the Prime Minister, and they will think that what we've got is a government for whom education simply doesn't matter.
Rishi Sunak chaired a meeting with his Education Secretary earlier and will publish a full list of schools affected this week. A problematic return from the summer break in more ways than one. Rob Powell, Sky News in Westminster.
Well, one head teacher told us today she was horrified and disgusted at the Education Secretary's outburst and that she'd worked at fixing the problem from the moment she'd got notice that parts of her school would have to close. Some of her children have now begun the term in offices converted to classrooms in buildings owned by the local council. Sky's Becky Johnson reports now from Leicester.
Empty classrooms, a PE hall no longer safe, and a staircase with a crumbling ceiling.
So you can see the scaffolding that's supporting the roof.
The head teacher, faced with all of this, didn't expect the Education Secretary to say this.
Does anyone ever say, you know what, you've done a good job because everyone else has sat on their and done nothing?
Oh my goodness. And that's our Education Secretary using that language for the situation. What I would like to say is, please, Gillian, come and see my school. I worked from the moment we got the notice of closure in order to make things work. I am horrified and disgusted by what I've just seen.
You seem quite upset by it.
I am upset because I've watched what my staff have done.
That includes moving more than half the children into nearby buildings owned by the local council and transforming offices into temporary classrooms.
Initially, it was very, very stressful. We were told, I think the Department for Education wanted us out within 24 hours, but there was no way we could move all of, we've got library books, the children's books, they've got at least 12 per child, tables, chairs. So it took us around 3 days, 2 to 3 days.
And for the children, it's been unsettling.
Really nerve-wracking because because we're moving to a new building. A lot of us thought that we was going to have different teachers. The teachers have been ensuring us that we're going to be okay, but I still think the rooms could be a little bit bigger.
As more schools are expected to find crumbling concrete, there's growing anger about what the government knew and when. For head teachers having to deal with RAC and find solutions that work for pupils, parents and staff, hearing the Education Secretary use language that wouldn't be allowed in school is at the very best unhelpful. What they need is answers to the many questions now hanging over the futures of affected schools. Becky Johnson, Sky News, Leicester.
Well, our chief political correspondent John Craig is in Downing Street tonight. And John, hard to remember a first day of school at Westminster quite like this one. And Gillian Keegan having to defend herself again tonight over being on holiday as the concrete crisis developed.
That came when the Education Secretary was appearing on our new politics programme, the Politics Hub, and she was challenged by Sophie Ridge about going away on holiday in late August from something like the 26th to the 31st. She said it was a family holiday, it was her father's birthday. She said her return was delayed by the air traffic control chaos. It capped a pretty disastrous day for the Education Secretary and a terrible start to the new term at Westminster for the Prime Minister. Now, the day in Parliament began with first of all, the 3 by-election winners from late July taking their seats, and then the writs were moved for 2 by-elections, which will take place next month. First of all, Rutherglen and Hamilton West in Scotland, which is expected on the 5th of October, probably. That's going to be a straight fight between Labour and the SNP. But also the Mid-Bedfordshire by-election. Finally, the writ has been moved for that one, where Nadine Dorries was the MP. That'll probably be a little bit later in October. So 2 big challenges for Mr Sunak coming up. Also, the government's got plenty more challenges on this education fiasco. Labour are turning up the heat by asking more questions, trying to force a vote on Wednesday on forcing the government to hand over more documents and more information. There are 3 main charges against Gillian Keegan and the government. 1, she didn't act quick enough. 2, she's failed to tell parents what's going on, so they've no idea whether their children can go to school or not. And the 3rd charge, which was mentioned today by a former civil servant at the Department for Education, Jonathan Slater, that Rishi Sunak, when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer, cut the spending on school repairs, perhaps by as much as a half. Now, Mr Sunak denied that today, said it was not true, but that's a charge that we had a lot of in the Commons today, and we'll hear a lot more of, that the Tories cut spending, and of course it's the chickens are coming home to roost, as one MP said in the Commons.
In Downing Street. Thank you. One of the country's most senior police officers resigned today after what one political leader called a series of self-inflicted blows to his force. Simon Byrne quit as the Chief Constable of Northern Ireland's police service following a major data breach and the unlawful disciplining of two junior officers. Our senior Ireland correspondent David Blevins has more.
He was defiant last Thursday. Chief Constable, have you considered your position today?
I'm not resigning.
But a lot can change in the space of 4 days when you're a police chief in the eye of a political storm in Northern Ireland.
The Chief Constable, Simon Byrne, has today tendered his resignation to the Northern Ireland Policing Board with immediate effect.
He had asked the policing board, his employer, to issue a statement on his behalf.
The last few days have been very difficult for all concerned. Regardless of the rights and wrongs, it is now time for someone new to lead this proud and resolute organisation. Can I thank those who have shown me trust, advice and friendship, and of course thank you to the brave men and women of the Police Service of Northern Ireland.
Simon Byrne was already under pressure over an unprecedented data breach, the names of 10,000 officers having been published online. But when the High Court ruled that he'd unlawfully disciplined 2 officers over an arrest because of real or perceived pressure from Sinn Féin, unionists lost confidence in him entirely.
We welcome the decision by the Chief Constable to announce his resignation. We believe that is the right thing to do in all the circumstances. And now we want to see confidence rebuilt in our police service, and we will work with the PSNI. They have our full support.
He was never far from controversy, not least when he posted this picture online, posing with heavily armed officers in Crossmaglen on Christmas Day.
He was pretty gaffe prone, let's face it. There was a lot of times when he, put his foot in it, he said things that maybe he shouldn't have. And also we're hearing he's quite a stubborn person and wasn't really great at taking advice of others when they warned him to maybe slow down or stay clear of certain subjects. And that got him into trouble as time went on.
The Chief Constable's exit means responsibility for policing passes to the Deputy Chief Constable in the interim. Applications will be invited soon for what is one of the toughest policing jobs in the UK. The most camera-shy Chief Constable has left office by his favourite route, the back door. David Blevins, Sky News in Belfast.
The Labour leader said today that he wanted people hungry and determined to change the country after he made changes to his shadow cabinet team. Angela Rayner becomes Levelling Up Secretary, taking over from Lisa Nandy, who's been demoted. Steve Reid has been moved to Environment after Jim McMahon resigned to focus on his health. Shabana Mahmood replaces Reid in the Justice Brief. Jonathan Ashworth has been demoted, while Pat McFadden moves up to Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. Liz Kendall is back on Labour's front benches. Peter Kyle takes on the Science and Technology Brief, and Thangam Debonair moves to Culture. Darren Jones and Nick Thomas-Symonds become Shadow Ministers without portfolio. Lucy Powell is now Shadow Leader of the House, and Hilary Benn returns to the front benches as Shadow Northern Ireland Secretary. It's all ahead of the general election, likely next year, as our Deputy Political Editor Sam Coates reports.
Ed Miliband, good morning. Reshuffle day, the most anxious time for any member of the Shadow Cabinet.
Do you expect to stay in the Shadow Cabinet today? These are decisions for the leader. I used to have to make these decisions. I'd never liked reshuffle days.
This ex-leader knows how tough it can be to make the calls.
And do you remember how hard these days could be? For the leader, very hard.
How are you? Very good to see you.
Keir Starmer welcoming his latest new MP. Today, all about winning more of them. The first major rejig of his top team since 2021. He wants his party election ready.
The question I've asked myself is, have I got really, really good, talented people in post and people hungry and determined to change our country for the better? And that's why I've put this team together. And I'm delighted to have put such a strong team together to face the country.
The plans hashed out in the Labour leader's nondescript office are a mixture of reassurance and ruthlessness. A familiar face back on the front bench.
Can I say to the Secretary of State that I look forward to working with him?
Hilary Benn immediately in action, hours after landing his new job as Shadow Northern Ireland Secretary. And a brutal demotion. Former leadership contender Lisa Nandy shifted to Shadow International Development after a tense conversation with the man who beat her to the top job. That to create an opening for Angela Rayner. The deputy leader caused a meltdown in the last reshuffle, now moved to Nandy's old levelling up job with minimal fuss.
Time is short before the next general election, and Labour know that there are only a few moments between now and then where they can get through to voters to change minds. So getting the top team right is vital. Keir Starmer has decided in this reshuffle to prioritise experience, bringing back Hilary Benn, who first served under Tony Blair, and also shown he's not afraid to pick fights with the left, bringing Liz Kendall, a reformer, to the welfare brief, and Pat McFadden to run the election campaign. But do voters think this is enough to get their support?
Shipley near Bradford. The last Labour leader to win here was Tony Blair. Can Starmer manage it?
I've actually gone off the Labour Party for quite a while, and then I just think now we seem to be getting it back as a Labour leader.
I don't see no difference between him and the Conservative Party.
For me, he's making a better job than the Conservatives, definitely.
Keir Starmer wants to convince the nation that he's a statesman, someone they can trust with their vote. Polls suggest he's on course to be the next Prime Minister. Is this the team to take him to power? Sam Coates, Sky News, Westminster.
The Chinese President Xi Jinping will miss this weekend's G20 summit in India as relations between the two countries over their disputed shared border remain sour. India recently overtook China as the world's most populous nation, and it's also competing for trade. But the Chinese economy, which enjoyed spectacular growth for decades, is now slowing. Well, that is despite huge investments in infrastructure, much of which has been funded by debt. Our Asia correspondent, Helen Ann-Smith, has travelled to the city of Zunyi in South China's Guizhou province to see the impact.
In the city of Zunyi, there's a road that speaks volumes about the state of the Chinese economy. A multi-billion yuan expressway, one side unfinished and abandoned, a symbol of a system that's stuttering. On the other side of the hill, we find a connecting tunnel where the project has abruptly stopped. Pillars show where it was meant to continue, as do blocks of homes vacated, lives moved on to make space. Just a small number of residents have hung on here. Shi Chengli is one of them. She's lived here for 40 years, but her life is now in limbo, and she has a clear idea as to why.
The main reason is that there is no money. The state does not have any money left. I signed a contract. They said we would have a new apartment in 3 years. It will be the 5th year in September.
Everywhere you look here is infrastructure unfinished. In fact, Guizhou province is one of the poorest in China, and it is also the most indebted. And the reason is the model of growth that for so long drove such remarkable numbers. Huge borrowing, vast building, regardless of whether the projects were really needed. The problem now is that China is drowning in debt, and there is essentially nothing left to build. It means the country is littered with sites like this, the most visual representation of an economic model that was never sustainable. These problems aren't new, but they're biting now, as things haven't bounced back post-COVID. Consumers cutting back after months of lockdowns that shut businesses, depleted savings, and left confidence in tatters. Business is a lot worse, says this woman. It's bad now, getting worse year after year, and we're not doing well. And perhaps the most ominous threat, the Chinese housing market. Sites like this, unfinished, work slowed. Developers that can't manage their debts, leaving buyers stranded and confidence flawed. This site is run by Country Garden, the latest giant to run into difficulty. Li Shangguo is one of the few workers left. He says others elsewhere are not getting paid.
Nowadays, all the big projects are like this, even good projects. Workers sometimes only get their money at the end of the year, which is a good case scenario. Some of them can't get it at all.
A sales representative here told us the site is proceeding as planned. And while experts say all this is unlikely to cast the economy into major meltdown or crisis, the era of miracle growth is clearly over, and it is people who will pay for the slowdown. Helen Ann Smith, Sky News in Guizhou province.
Tens of thousands of festival goers who have been stranded at one of the world's most iconic but remote festivals are finally on their way home tonight. Torrential rain had turned the desert, where the Burning Man festival is held in Nevada, to mud. But many were still insisting they had a great time, as our US correspondent Martha Kellner reports.
The slow and sticky exodus has begun.
We love Burning Man.
Routes home from Burning Man are finally opening up, but it may take days to clear this site.
It was dangerous.
Dangerous, but fun.
But we made it. Super fun.
We made it.
All right, guys. This arts and music festival is held on a playa, a dried-up ancient lake bed in the middle of the Nevada desert. Its remoteness is part of the attraction for many whom consider this a yearly pilgrimage. But 3 months of rain in 3 days have turned the ground to a mix of mud and clay, trapping thousands in its confines. Its CEO, though, insisting there is no cause for panic.
We've made it really clear that we do not see this as an evacuation situation and that the community is patient and the water is drying up.
With roads out impassable over the weekend, some trudged for miles to escape. They were advised to wear plastic bags on their feet.
We took everything we needed to survive on our backs. There were actually rivers that were flooding through the playa where we had to test and see how deep they were. My wife was carried across the river by a very strong man who carried her.
Stay funny, stay happy, stay hydrated.
But with so many desperate to leave, they did advise some to postpone their journey home another day to avoid a mega traffic jam in the desert. Martha Kellner, Sky News.
More than 21,000 people have crossed the channel in small boats this year. More made the journey today, in addition to more than 100 on Sunday, which took this year's total to 21,086. Another 872 crossed the channel on Saturday, more than on any other day this year, taking advantage of the weather conditions. A 42-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of assaulting the former Manchester United captain, Roy Keane. There was an alleged altercation at yesterday's match between United and Arsenal, at which Keane was working as a pundit. And the former Cabinet Minister, Sir Gavin Williamson, has apologised in the House of Commons to the former Chief Whip, Wendy Morton, after the independent expert panel found he had bullied her. The panel said he was rude, aggressive, offensive and intimidating after he did not receive a ticket to the late Queen's funeral. Now, for most of us, a reminder of the extremes of weather was right outside our doors today when we stepped into a September heatwave. We'll hear the positive part of that in a moment. But warming temperatures are also causing concerns that tropical diseases could arrive in the UK. Mosquitoes, which in other countries can carry diseases like Zika, have been found here. Our science correspondent Thomas Moore saw how they're being tracked.
Look in this ditch to see if there's any larvae.
On the Kent marshes, scientists are on alert for alien invaders. Mosquito species coming in from abroad and breeding in the warm weather.
Is this Culex? Yeah.
The Culex mosquito arrived in the Thames estuary just over a decade ago. It can spread West Nile virus, which sometimes infects the brain. But it is the tiger mosquito that the UK Health Security Agency is most concerned about. It transmits dengue, Zika and chikungunya, serious diseases more commonly seen in the tropics.
We've found the mosquito on 6 occasions, and they've all been in the southeast of England. With climate change and as the summer's warm and the seasons lengthen, then it becomes more suitable. Every time these mosquitoes come into the country, there is greater potential for those mosquitoes to establish because it's a warmer climate.
The tiger mosquito has spread rapidly through Europe since it was first identified in Italy in 1990. It's now breeding in 13 countries and has been spotted in a further 5, including the UK. Modelling suggests that within 50 years it will become established over much of England and southern Wales. These mosquitoes are too small to fly across the Channel, but as they spread through Europe, there's an increasing risk of them being imported through trade and travel. Shipping containers, luggage, even people's cars are a route into the country. An outbreak of dengue fever in Bangladesh has so far killed at least 360 people. Chikungunya has killed hundreds more worldwide this year, and Zika is still causing birth defects in some countries.
Overwinter their eggs in Europe.
London's Tropical Medicine Hospital has a secure breeding colony of tiger mosquitoes to try to understand what they're up against.
They're all acute diseases that are rarely fatal but can be very, very severe and lead to prolonged hospital stays. If we were to cycle back 5 or 10 years, we would have thought Zika was just a minor disease. And because these mosquitoes are spread across such broad parts of the world, what were historically minor diseases now have the potential to be pandemics.
Let's go and check the next one.
The UK Health Security Agency takes steps to eliminate any tiger mosquitoes as soon as they're spotted. But their rapid spread through Europe suggests that will only hold them at bay for so long. Thomas Moore, Sky News in Kent.
Well, it is the time of year when thoughts usually turn to the seasons to come rather than the one past. But summer's grip isn't gone this September in the UK. In fact, we could have our hottest temperature of the year so far. The picture, as ever, is very different elsewhere, as Becky Cottrell reports.
For holidaymakers coming to North Wales in September, weather like this is quite the pleasant surprise. Locals and tourists happy to see the back of summer if this is what autumn looks like.
Well, it's tremendous. I'm over the moon, can't believe it. And especially after the summer that we've had, to get this right at the tail end is a real bonus.
This one starts school on Thursday, so we're just enjoying our last day before she starts school, so it's been fabulous.
Across the UK, we could see temperatures soar higher than the likes of Ibiza by midweek.
I see September as the new summer month. Climate change has moved things on, even if it's only inched things on as far as we're concerned in a temperate climate. We've swapped, if you like, Spain and ourselves. Spain and Portugal, Iberia has gone into low pressure, so that's enabled a high pressure to build over the UK, and they're getting the floods, we're getting the beautiful sunshine.
The contrast couldn't be more stark. Roads turned into rivers across Spain. While in Greece, they're still battling wildfires caused by extreme heat. This one near Athens, thankfully tamed by emergency services. Back in the UK, and the weather here isn't without risk. A heat health alert has been issued across much of England for the rest of the week. For those commuting from London to Woking, navigating public transport today has been a sticky affair.
The tubes are terrible because there's no air conditioning in the tubes. So it's a bit hard for me because I have COPD.
The underground was stuffy, there's a lot of commuters there, and the air conditioning wasn't working properly.
If you're a fan of the heat, you should make the most of it over the next few days, as this week could be a late parting gift from the summer gods. But with temperatures set to top 30 degrees by Wednesday, even the most ambitious of sun seekers should exercise caution, ideally in the form of sun cream and plenty of water. Becky Cottrell, Sky News.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Among the stories we will be discussing, this on the front of the Metro, the headline Concrete Bungle. Tonight, I'll be joined by the political editor of The Guardian, Pippa Crerar, and the political editor of The Sun, Harry Cole.
the 5 of us have made it out of the car.
Welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.
Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories this evening. The Education Secretary has apologised after being caught on camera, swearing with frustration after being interviewed about unsafe concrete in schools. Simon Byrne has resigned as Chief Constable of the Police Service of Northern Ireland with immediate effect. And Angela Rayner has been named Shadow Levelling Up Secretary in a reshuffle of Labour's front bench. Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the political editor of The Guardian, Pippa Crerar, and the political editor of The Sun, Harry Cole. Welcome to both of you. As ever, to the front pages, first of all, starting with the Metro. On their front page, as you can see, concrete bungle. They lead with the Education Secretary's off-camera rant. The Financial Times is also leading with the latest on schools, with the headline "Crumbling Schools Crisis" puts Sunak on the back foot as 2 by-elections loom. Same story for The Guardian, which says the Prime Minister faces claims that he failed to grasp the gravity of the situation while he was Chancellor. While the Yorkshire Post reports that hundreds more schools could be at risk of closing. Daily Express leads with hopes for a weight loss jab which could save lives and cut down the NHS's £6.5 billion yearly obesity bill. Labour's front bench reshuffle sees Blairites call to the top team and figures of the left demoted. That's the lead for The Eye. Could Dracula be vegan? That's what the Daily Star has on its front page. And City AM splashes with an interview with the former Bank of England economist Andy Haldane, who's blamed the bank's quantitative easing policy for fuelling inflation. That is based on an interview that will air on Sky's Politics Hub tomorrow evening. So let's get the thoughts then of Pippa and Harry, and plenty to talk about. First day back at Westminster. Harry, why don't you kick it off? What a day for Sunak and Keegan. Keegan saying, "Why don't you thank me?" and Sunak saying, "Don't blame me." So where does it leave us?
What a day. Yeah, first day back from the holidays. Definitely didn't go cold turkey today. It was, one of the stranger morning rounds I've ever seen a minister do. It actually wasn't until a few hours after the sort of the round ended that we saw the behind-the-scenes footage that ITV got hold of, where Keegan sort of let rip at Dan Hewitt, a fairly mild-mannered man to anyone that's ever met him, and certainly not a sort of agitating wind-up merchant like some interviewers can be. Ironically, actually, Sunak was probably in a bit more difficulty this morning than he was tonight. Keegan's outburst and apology, and then subsequent admission that she was actually at her dad's birthday party while all this was kicking off and couldn't get home because of air traffic control, and all the other fuel she's poured on this fire, has actually distracted from quite a serious allegation made by a very former very senior civil servant at the Department of Education, that actually Rishi Sunak's Treasury in 2020 and 2021 were directly behind a slashing of funding for school repairs. Now, Number 10 are quibbling with those figures. They're disputing it. Sunak came out and said, actually, no, that's wrong. I did X, Y, and Z else to tackle this problem. But actually, Keegan's sort of implosion actually sort of distracted from taking a bit of the heat off Number 10. Now, it's not in any way a good day for the Tories. I think, as the Daily Mail say tomorrow, the sort of scandal turns into a farce, and that's never good. When people are sort of laughing at you, that's even worse than anything else. As sort of Liz Truss found out last year. Now, the problem is that this isn't going to go away overnight, and it seems that every day that comes, there is more anger, and I don't think the government really can afford to have many more days like today. We're still a year out from an election.
Yes, The Guardian picturing the woman at the centre of all of this as well, the Education Secretary, Pippa. I mean, nobody's sort of suggesting that a dead cat was thrown to take the heat off the PM and this was all deliberate, are they?
No, I don't think so. I think
Gillian Keegan has a reputation for being fairly straight talking. That often comes across in interviews. In this case, it obviously came across at the end of an interview. So I think she was sort of speaking from the heart. However, it may be a distraction, as Harry says, for one day. It may have meant that Rishi Sunak's first day back to Parliament it was less dramatic than it might otherwise have been for him personally. But this is a crisis which is set to rumble on. So actually, it only just buys him a very short amount of time. The focus, as we have put on the front page of The Guardian tomorrow, is now very much on Rishi Sunak and the decisions he made when he was Chancellor. The fact that the Department for Education had asked for 300 or 400 schools a year to be upgraded. They'd always expect there to be a lower number, but what they hadn't expected is that the 100 level, which apparently was the ambition, would be halved by Sunak when he was Chancellor, even though the Treasury had been warned of the potentially lethal implications of school buildings collapsing. We've seen a very small number of those happening already. There was one in, I think it was last year, in southeast London, near where I live, where children ended up in hospital. And actually, this is a crisis which could be so much worse were it to have arisen as a result of a catastrophic incident in a school where more children were seriously injured, or indeed even killed. And I know that there will be thousands of parents across the country who take not that much comfort today from the government saying to them, oh, it's only going to be hundreds of schools, not thousands. I mean, that could still be 999 schools with thousands of pupils in each of them, built of concrete from the 50s onwards, who'll be sitting here not having had confirmation from their own schools yet, because some of those haven't replied to the government survey, and waiting to see whether their children's education is going to be interrupted again. That might be in a very minor way by moving to porta cabins on the school premises, or it might be the whole school getting shut down and having to be bussed elsewhere. But any parent waiting to hear that news from their own school now, after the few years that we've had with the interruptions to education as a result of the pandemic, will be willing the government to get a grip on it, and asking the questions why Rishi Sunak as Chancellor decided that he would stick with 50 upgrades a year rather than doing what the Department for Education officials said and stress the urgency of, and doing more, so that we weren't in this position today.
Yes, and lots of people reacting to Rishi Sunak saying 95% of schools are fine, on social media pointing out that that means 1 in 20 could crush a child. So that was one issue for him. Yorkshire Post is again going on that prime ministerial denial that he cut funding for school buildings, for school rebuilding. He said, didn't he, that the 50 a year that he funded as Chancellor was consistent with what had happened in the last decade. Well, the previous decade was austerity. So what's he judging it against, Harry?
Yeah, there was a bit of a quibble on this, and actually, I think Number 10 need to get their sort of lines straight on this, because at the same time as saying actually it was all in line with previous administrations, that doesn't look quite true from the actual figures. The IFS and the Labour Party both saying tonight that actually there's somewhere between a 40% reduction in capital spending, without getting too technical on the different types of government spending, but particularly on capital spending for school refurbishments, there is a 40 to 50% decline in the last 10 years. And who's been in power for the last 13 years? It's the Tories. And I think it just sort of feeds into a bit of a narrative that's starting to really take hold, especially amongst Tory MPs this summer. You know, Gillian Keegan herself she said she was delayed from going on holiday because of strike action, which she had to sort out. Then this all kicked off. And then she managed to get a couple of days away at the end of the summer, where she got stuck coming back to rushing back to deal with this problem because all the flights were grounded. And there's just a sort of sense that nothing is really working in this country at the moment. And if MPs are picking up on that, my God, the public are there already. And really, once that sort of narrative takes hold, that sort of gloom kicks in, even amongst the sort of government ministers, then really you do get into a bit of a sort of doom loop and a sort of spiral of decline, where it's pretty clear the government have lost the benefit of the doubt on a large amount of things. The fact is that it's not every day that an interview that is, that sort of comments after an interview are broadcast. They do happen. It does happen before. But I think, frankly, the sort of complacency that Keegan was showing just really sort of jarred with what a lot of people are feeling about this country, which is basically everything seems a bit broken. And they can say all they like about the fact that it's town halls and councils that are responsible for the upkeep of schools. But you're the education secretary. And, on that interview with Sophie Ridge earlier tonight. Would she apologise? No, she wouldn't. Then she did. Then she was saying it wasn't her responsibility. Then she said she took full responsibility. And you just think this is getting really messy now. And I think whatever the government say, there's a sort of growing feeling amongst a lot of voters that the polls are showing that, they've had their chance. Time to let someone else have a go, clear the stage, because this ain't working.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I think she was making 2 points, probably. One, this has been going on since the mid-1990s. Why is this all on me? It was a difficult decision. That was one part of it. Secondly, she suggested her department was really stepping in doing local council's work, trying to get the mitigations in place, trying to get the porta cabins, and they're not getting thanked for that side of the role. So that's what she was doing. Yeah, I think Sophie was pointing out that the last 7 Conservative 7 education secretaries have been Conservative. So, who do you look back and blame? That sort of takes us to the reshuffle that we've seen with Labour, leaving some key positions or some key people in post, Pippa, but moving Angela Rayner. What's the significance of all of this for you?
Well, I mean, the top tier of the Shadow Cabinet, Keir Starmer's Shadow Cabinet, so, the senior jobs, Rachel Reeves as Shadow Chancellor, and Home, Health, Education and Energy all stayed put, and that had been fairly widely expected. The big question for Starmer was what he was going to do with Angela Rayner. You remember that reshuffle back in May 2021 following the Harrogate by-election, which was completely chaotic, where Rayner was threatened with demotion and then ended up winning a promotion and indeed several other job titles as well. Obviously, they were keen to avoid that and made sure that that she was happy with what she got. I was told she was offered levelling up. It wasn't something she asked for, but she was very keen to hang on to strategic responsibility for the future of work stuff that Labour is coming up with. And of course, she has quite openly said in the past that she would expect Keir Starmer to make her his Deputy Prime Minister should he become Prime Minister and make it to number 10. Their relationship's definitely better than it has been in the past, although they do represent increasingly different wings of the party. And one of the really overwhelming, the sort of obvious takeaways from this Shadow Cabinet reshuffle was the number of Blairites that seemed to be moved into senior positions, people that served as ministers under Blair and Brown, and indeed were special advisors, including some really key Blair acolytes, now in very senior positions, and a feeling amongst the soft left in the party that actually the Labour Party has moved. The right of the Labour Party is in the ascendancy. They see that as essential to win the next election. But when you speak to Labour aides tonight, they stressed that what it was all about for them was experience, not just experience of winning elections, but also experience of running governments. And of course, what all those people have in common, whether they served under Blair or indeed Brown, was that they both have the political experience of doing well at the ballot box, but crucially, the experience of running departments and sort of, taking the country on after an extremely difficult time, as Harry has just set out.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And, is that idea of bring back the Blairites the most scary part of this for the Conservatives, Harry? Because we saw the success from 1997 after 18 years of Tory rule. The similarities were all there for some people.
I don't think it's scary, I think is the wrong word. At the end of the day, most people, would like the country to be run, from the centre ground, and that battle is always where the centre ground is. Let's not forget where Labour are coming from. They spent 5 years on the lunatic fringe of British politics under Jeremy Corbyn. So tacking back to where they once won from is, I don't think that's scary for the country. I think that's probably a good thing. Look, I think you've got to look at this reshuffle alongside the last one as well, where people like Wes Streeting and Bridget Phillipson were moved up. This seems to be the sort of next phase of it. And it's about, this is the team that Keir Starmer says is going to stand, be the ones that walk up Whitehall, hopefully for him next year, next May, next October, whenever it may be. And it's about, a team that could actually do those jobs, and B, a team that can actually win the election to get them into there. So yeah, as Pippa said, you've got some very battle-hardened people. Patrick McFadden, Tony Blair's former political secretary, former minister himself. Hilary Benn, not necessarily, obviously by birth, not of the right of the party, but certainly a sort of sensible, respected figure. Perhaps a little bit too on the second referendum Remainy side for some people, but definitely a sort of Labour, closest Labour really have to a stalwart these days, and there aren't many of them in the party. And you've got to look at who went down. Lisa Nandy, someone who's of the soft left, someone who's been accused, rightly or wrongly, of not necessarily being uber loyal to Starmer. someone like John Ashworth, who's been moved into a sort of more of a tack dog role, but again of the soft left, gets demoted. So look, the direction of travel is there. The right people for Keir Starmer are squealing. It's Momentum, the Jeremy Corbyn supporters group, that are coming out and slagging this off tonight. And actually, you know, I think if you look at the people in those jobs, there's a mixture of sensible, middle of the road politics, and there's also that element of experience. So the two of those things, I think, actually go together to make the Labour Party a lot less scary to anyone, let alone, I don't know, only Momentum seem to be whining.
OK, very good. Anyway, May or October, you've been warned, definitely. See you in just a moment. Plenty more still to come, including why summer ain't over yet, according to the Metro, just as schools return, of course.
I'm Hannah Thomas-Peter, and I'm Sky's climate change correspondent. The UK is a world leader in wind power. Power! Power! People! It's part of the Congo Basin rainforest, which is such an important ecosystem. It's known as the lungs of Africa. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. She doesn't really enjoy speaking to the press, and it wasn't clear right up until the last moment that she was going to sit down with me.
I might be just very naive, but I do believe that change is possible, otherwise we wouldn't be climate activists.
I'm confident for the last 30 years we have known how bad it is. I'm not here to apologize, I'm here to fight for the next step.
You can see just the piles and piles of stuff, these sofas and people's desks and children's books, and you can see inside this home here, people trying to sort out their home. It's just been devastating.
I think everything's at stake. The future of our planet, the future of the beauty around us, the future of you and me.
Hello again, you're watching the press preview, joined once again by the political editor of The Guardian, Pippa Crerar, and the political editor of The Sun, Harry Cole. Welcome back to both of you. To the FT, Pippa, the news from Northern Ireland, the top police officer there has resigned after a couple of serious incidents, one might say.
Yes, the news that Simon Byrne, the Chief Constable of PSNI, stood down today after an emergency meeting And there's been a series, a litany of difficult situations that he's presided over in recent months. There was obviously the hugely serious issue of the data breach of personal information of about 10,000 officers and support staff, which is mentioned there in the FT. But there's a more sort of, and then last week the Belfast High Court ruled that the force unlawfully disciplined two junior officers to placate Sinn Féin. And this is all set against the backdrop of an ongoing row on the perceived differences in how Republican and Loyalist gatherings were policed during the pandemic when the rule of six was in place. And Byrne had originally said that he wouldn't resign following the emergency meeting of the policing board last week, and indicated he was considering an appeal against the ruling. But I think the conclusion was that his statements were met with anger by the Police Federation in Northern Ireland. The vice chair of the board said that federation statement was quite significant in his decision to change his mind and to quit. And he did a press conference earlier in which he said that the welfare of the force was always at the top of his mind. Really, it's yet another example of individuals running police forces becoming a distraction, their leadership coming into question. We've seen it with the Met Police as well, obviously, in recent times with Cressida Dick, and ultimately coming to the conclusion that there's no other option really for the continuation of the force, particularly in such a sensitive area for policing as Northern Ireland. There's no other option really than to stand down and let somebody pick up the reins.
OK, we move on to the weather, because we're Brits and we like talking about it. It's inside the metro. Summer ain't over yet. It's felt like it's been over us for a long time, hasn't it? Let's be honest about it. Anyway, 32 degrees, just as schools return. It's always the way.
Yeah, couldn't quite believe it when I actually woke up this morning and I looked out the window. I woke up quite early and it was very misty. And so I thought, oh, typical back to school weather. I'll put on a sort of a thick suit. And I got to work. By the time I got to work, I was cursing myself for wondering why I ditched the linen. Yeah, typical. After a complete washout summer, I feel sorry for the kids. It basically seems to have been raining ever since they broke up for the school holidays. It was hot before, it then rained for 6 weeks, and now it's going to be hot for a week or so afterwards. But typical, really, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I want them to change the timing of the summer holidays, actually, to be a little bit more like Scotland, to be honest with you. Just a very quick look as well while we're leaving. Same page in the Metro, actually. The 70,000 who are beginning the great trek home as Burning Man mud dries out. It's been a slow process. They talked about how dangerous it's been. Extraordinary extreme rain there. We've seen it in Spain as well. Forecast for a red alert for rainfall in central Greece too. So, it's still all... well, it's hard to predict, let's put it that way. Plenty more from both of you in the next hour. Thank you both for now, very much indeed. Pippa and Harry, let's catch up with the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, high pressure, as you've probably noticed, dominating this week, bringing heatwave conditions, potentially the highest temperature of the year. A largely dry and sunny start tomorrow, drizzly rain in the extreme north and a few possibly thundery showers in the far southwest. Some fog too, mainly over eastern Britain to the north of the Wash. The morning will be mostly dry with plenty of sunshine, although fog may linger into the rush hour. Northern Scotland rather grey, Ireland quite cloudy. The chance of the odd thundery shower in the west as well. Warmer overall, rather windy near southern and especially southwestern coasts.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, our press preview and news review continuing through Sky News at 11. More on the Education Secretary and her 4-letter rant.